Welcome back to the Duke's Revenge, where the coldest hearts burn the hottest, and where the women society tried to bury rise from the ashes to claim everything. I'm so grateful you're here with me tonight, wherever you are in this vast and complicated world, stealing a quiet moment to lose yourself in a story of obsession, vengeance, and the kind of love that survives every attempt to destroy it. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from right now? What time is it in your corner of the world? I want to know if you're curled up in Mumbai at midnight, driving through rain-soaked streets in Seattle, or watching the sun rise over the rooftops of Paris. Drop your city and the hour in the comments below, because I love knowing that we're scattered across every continent, all of us drawn together by these tales of power and passion and the courage it takes to survive when everyone expects you to shatter into pieces. Tonight's story begins in the frozen corridors of a Yorkshire manor in 1856, where a governess has been hiding bruises beneath her sleeves for 3 brutal years. They hired her to teach their children. They paid her to disappear. But what Lady Dorothea Vance never suspected, what she couldn't possibly have known, was that the most feared Duke in all of England had been watching from the shadows for 8 months, documenting every cruelty, building a case that would burn her world to ash, and falling so deeply, dangerously obsessed with the woman she brutalized that he had stopped sleeping, stopped eating, stopped being able to function as anything other than a man possessed. She thought no one noticed her suffering. She thought she would simply endure until she saved enough to escape. She thought she was invisible. She was catastrophically wrong. And when she stumbled at a winter ball she was never meant to attend, when her sleeve tore and revealed the truth written in bruises across her skin, the Duke who caught her didn't ask if she was all right. He growled 2 words that would change everything. Whose hand? The riding crop whistled through the air and caught Helena Wren across the shoulders, with a crack that echoed off the schoolroom walls like a pistol shot. The impact drove her forward onto her hands and knees, her palms slamming against cold wooden floorboards, her vision fracturing into white-hot shards of agony. She did not cry out. She had learned in 3 years of service at Vance Hall that crying out only made Lady Dorothea swing harder. You dare. Lady Dorothea's voice was silk wrapped around a razor, each syllable slicing through the air with practiced cruelty. You dare to correct my son in front of the Reverend's wife? The second blow landed before Helena could draw breath, lower this time, catching her across the ribs with enough force to steal what little air remained in her lungs. Something cracked. Helena prayed it was the whalebone in her corset and not the bones beneath, but she couldn't be certain. The pain was too vast to catalogue. Julian's translation was flawless. Lady Dorothea circled her fallen governess like a hawk examining wounded prey, her silk skirts whispering against the floorboards with each deliberate step. The afternoon light caught the riding crop as she raised it again, making the leather gleam like something alive. Flawless, Miss Wren. The Reverend's wife was so impressed she commented upon it specifically. And you worthless, presumptuous creature, chose that moment to suggest otherwise. The conjugation was incorrect, my lady. Helena's voice emerged as a rasp, forced through teeth gritted against the fire in her ribs. She would not apologize for doing her job. She would not grovel for being right. The Reverend's wife has studied Latin. She noticed the error before I spoke. I was attempting to spare Master Julian the embarrassment of... The third blow silenced her. This one landed across her upper back, precisely where the first had fallen, splitting skin that had barely healed from last week's punishment. Helena's arms buckled. Her cheek struck the floor. The taste of copper flooded her mouth. She had bitten through her tongue. Above her, Lady Dorothea's breathing had quickened with the exertion, her composure cracking to reveal the ugly truth beneath the beautiful mask. You were attempting, Lady Dorothea said softly, crouching down to grab Helena's chin with cruel, manicured fingers. To humiliate my family. You were attempting to demonstrate your pathetic superiority over your betters. You were attempting. She wrenched Helena's face upward, forcing eye contact, her grip tight enough to leave bruises. To make yourself noticed. Helena met her employer's gaze. Lady Dorothea Vance had been a celebrated beauty in her youth. Cornflower blue eyes, golden hair, a face that had launched 1,000 proposals before she'd settled for a baronet with a crumbling estate and a wandering eye. 20 years of disappointed ambition had curdled that beauty into something sharp and toxic. The eyes that had once charmed earls now glittered with malice. The face that had graced London ballrooms now twisted with contempt. A governess does not get noticed. Lady Dorothea's grip tightened until Helena could feel the individual impressions of her fingers bruising into her jaw. A governess is furniture. A governess is invisible. Do you understand me, Miss Wren? Yes, my lady. I don't think you do. Lady Dorothea released her chin with a shove that sent Helena's head cracking against the floor. Stars exploded across her vision. I think you still believe you're something special. That fine education your father gave you. Those pretty manners your mother instilled before she had the good grace to die. You think they elevate you above your station. She rose, smoothing her skirts with the casual gesture of a woman who had done nothing more strenuous than arrange flowers. The riding crop hung loose in her hand. Blood. Helena's blood, staining the tip. But they don't elevate you, Miss Wren. They make you worse. They make you a pretender. A fraud. Lady Dorothea's smile was razor thin. Nothing pretending to be something. Helena said nothing. There was nothing to say. 3 years of this treatment had taught her that silence was survival, that stillness was safety, that any response would only fuel the fire of Lady Dorothea's rage. You will go to your room. You will remain there until morning. No dinner. You've clearly been eating enough to maintain your presumptions, and a fast will do you good. Lady Dorothea examined her reflection in the window glass, adjusting a curl that had come loose during her exertions. The children will manage without you for one evening. Master Julian has lessons to complete. Master Julian is not your concern tonight. Lady Dorothea's voice went cold as a Yorkshire winter. Your concern tonight is reflecting on your behavior and resolving to do better. Can you do that, Miss Wren? Can you remember your place? Or do I need to remind you more thoroughly? Helena lowered her eyes. No, my lady. I understand. Good. Lady Dorothea swept toward the door, then paused on the threshold, turning back with the calculated cruelty of a woman who enjoyed her power. Oh, and Miss Wren, if I hear that you've spoken to anyone about our little discussions, I'll ensure you never work in England again. I have connections, you know. Friends in every agency, every household that matters. One word from me, and you'll be scrubbing chamber pots in a workhouse until your fingers bleed. Do we understand each other? Yes, my lady. Excellent. Now get out of my sight. Helena pulled herself to her feet, swaying as the movement sent fresh waves of agony radiating from her back and ribs. Her gray dress, shapeless, colorless, deliberately unflattering, was torn at the shoulder where she'd fallen. She would need to mend it tonight, by candlelight, with fingers that would barely be able to grip a needle. She made her way to the servants' staircase and began to climb. The stairs were narrow and dark, designed for people who were meant to move through the house unseen. Helena counted them as she ascended, 47 steps from the ground floor to the attic where her tiny room awaited. She had counted them thousands of times over 3 years. The counting helped. The counting gave her something to focus on besides the fire in her ribs and the wetness she could feel spreading across her back where the riding crop had split skin. Her room was at the very top of the house, in what had once been a storage closet before a narrow bed and a cracked wash basin had been crammed inside. The window was small and faced north, admitting little light and less warmth. The walls were bare plaster, stained with damp. The floorboards were warped. The ceiling sloped so sharply that Helena could only stand fully upright in the center of the room. But it was hers. The only space in this sprawling manor where she could close a door and be alone with her suffering. She made it inside before her legs gave out. The floor was cold against her cheek. Helena lay there for a long moment, staring at the dust motes floating in the weak November light, and allowed herself to feel the full weight of her situation. 3 years. 3 years of beatings and deprivation and systematic cruelty. 3 years of being told she was worthless, ungrateful, presumptuous for daring to exist. 3 years of hiding bruises beneath long sleeves and pretending the limp in her step was an old injury rather than a fresh one. She was 24 years old. She had been pretty once, before grief and hardship had carved shadows beneath her eyes and stripped the softness from her features. She had been hopeful once, before her father's death from consumption and her mother's death from heartbreak had left her, orphaned and penniless at 21. She had been someone once, the beloved daughter of a gentleman's daughter and a brilliant music teacher, raised with books and laughter and the unshakable belief that she was destined for more than mere survival. Now she was nothing. A governess in a gray dress, counting the days until she had saved enough money to disappear. 18 months. 18 more months of careful economy, of hoarding every shilling, of enduring whatever cruelties Lady Dorothea chose to inflict. She had calculated it down to the penny, the exact amount she would need to rent a small room in a distant city, to support herself while she found new employment, to vanish so thoroughly that the Vances would never find her. 18 months. Surely she could survive 18 months. But as Helena lay on the cold floor of her tiny room, her back burning, and her ribs screaming, and her spirit threatening to shatter into 1,000 irreparable pieces, she wondered if she would live long enough to see that freedom. Lady Dorothea's punishments were escalating. What had begun as sharp words and occasional slaps had progressed to the riding crop, to hours locked in the wine cellar without food or water, to meals withheld and sleep denied, and a constant grinding campaign of psychological destruction. Each month brought new cruelties. Each month pushed Helena closer to the breaking point. She had seen it before, had heard whispered stories from other servants about governesses who had simply disappeared. Women who had been there one day and gone the next, with no forwarding address and no explanation. Helena had always assumed they had found other positions, had moved on to better circumstances. Now she wondered if some of them had simply stopped surviving. The thought was dark. The thought was dangerous. Helena pushed it away and forced herself to sit up, to assess the damage Lady Dorothea had inflicted. Her back was the worst. 3 distinct welts, 2 of which had split the skin and were seeping blood through her chemise. Her ribs ached with every breath, though she didn't think anything was broken. Her jaw was tender, where Lady Dorothea had grabbed her, and she could already feel the bruise forming. She would need to bind her ribs. She would need to clean the cuts on her back as best she could. Infection was a real danger, and she couldn't afford a physician. She would need to mend her dress and wash out the bloodstains before morning. She would need to survive another day. Helena closed her eyes and let the tears come. Silent. Hidden. The only indulgence she permitted herself in this house of horrors. Tomorrow, she would be strong again. Tomorrow, she would put on her gray dress and her invisible expression and endure whatever fresh cruelties awaited her. But tonight, in the privacy of her tiny room, with no one to see and no one to judge, she wept for the girl she had been and the woman she had become, and the future that grew darker with every passing day. 40 miles away, in a study lined with maps and military commendations, and the accumulated artifacts of a lifetime spent commanding men in war and peace, Griffin Mercer, Duke of Shadowmere, had not slept in 3 days. The report lay on his desk, 4 pages of precise handwriting documenting the latest incident at Vance Hall. Beside it sat a leather folder containing 3 items: a sketch of a woman's face, rendered by an artist of considerable skill, a lock of brown hair recovered from a wastepaper basket, and a pressed violet, retrieved from the buttonhole of a gray dress. Griffin stared at the sketch until his eyes burned. He had memorized every line of her face, the sharp cheekbones, the determined jaw, the gray eyes that held too much knowledge and too little hope. He knew her features better than he knew his own. He saw them every time he closed his eyes, every time he tried to sleep, every time he looked at anything at all. Helena Wren, the governess he had never spoken to, the woman who had consumed his every waking thought for 8 months, the woman who, according to this morning's report, had been beaten again. "Your Grace." Griffin looked up. Finch stood in the doorway, his weathered face carefully neutral, a fresh folder of documents in his hands. He had served under Griffin's command in the Crimea, had followed him home when the war ended, had become the most trusted member of his household staff. He had seen Griffin in every state, grief-stricken, rage-filled, coldly calculating. But even Finch had begun to look at him with concern, because Griffin knew what he looked like: unshaven, hollow-eyed, gaunt from forgetting to eat. He knew he looked like a man possessed. He knew, because that was exactly what he was. "The additional documentation you requested," Finch said, crossing to lay the folder on the desk. "Financial records for the Vance household, Sir Roland's gambling debts." Vance's personal expenditures, he paused, "and the physician's report from the market incident last month." Griffin opened the folder, with hands that trembled slightly. The physician's report was on top: Dr. Ashworth's assessment of injuries he had observed on Miss Helena Wren during a chance encounter at the village market. Multiple contusions, consistent with repeated, blunt force trauma. Evidence of older injuries in various stages of healing. Patient declined examination. Appeared fearful of attention. Recommend immediate intervention, though patient expressed unwillingness to involve authorities. "She declined examination," Griffin said quietly, "because she's afraid. Because Lady Vance has convinced her that no one will believe her, that she'll be ruined if she speaks. Yes, Your Grace. And now Lady Vance has beaten her again. 3 blows with a riding crop, for the crime of doing her job correctly." Griffin's hands curled into fists, crinkling the expensive paper. "How much more is she supposed to endure, Finch? How much more am I supposed to watch? The Pemberton ball is in 2 weeks, Your Grace. If we can—" "2 weeks!" Griffin laughed, and the sound was hollow, desperate. 2 more weeks of reading reports about her suffering. 2 more weeks of lying awake, wondering if tonight is the night Lady Vance finally kills her. 2 more weeks of— He broke off, pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes. "Your Grace." Finch's voice was careful. "When did you last eat?" "I don't remember." "When did you last sleep?" "I don't remember that either." Finch was silent for a long moment. Then he crossed to the sideboard, poured a glass of brandy, and set it firmly on the desk in front of Griffin. "Drink," he said, "and then tell me what's really happening. Because you haven't been yourself for months, and I need to understand what we're dealing with." Griffin stared at the brandy. Then he picked up the glass and drained it in one swallow, feeling the burn all the way down to his empty stomach. "I'm in love with her," he said quietly. "I've been in love with her for 8 months. I dream about her. I can't eat without wondering if she's being starved. I can't sleep without seeing her face. I've built my entire existence around the moment when I can finally save her, and the waiting is destroying me. You've never even spoken to her." "I know." Griffin's laugh was bitter. "I know how it sounds. Obsession. Madness. The kind of fixation that should terrify me. But Finch, He looked up, and his eyes were raw with something Finch had never seen in them before. "I saw her at Lady Pemberton's charity concert 6 months ago. She was standing in the back, in a gray dress, watching the musicians play. And during the final movement, a violin sonata, she closed her eyes." "Your Grace." Her face changed, Finch. The guardedness fell away, and she looked transported. Like the music was the only beautiful thing she had experienced in years, and she was trying to memorize it before it disappeared. Griffin's voice cracked, and I thought, this woman is extraordinary. This woman deserves better than the life she's living. This woman is worth saving. And now I think she's worth more than saving. Now I think she's worth everything I have, every resource, every connection, every ounce of power I've accumulated in my miserable life. Griffin stood, moving to the window, staring out at gardens he couldn't see. "I'm going to marry her, Finch. I don't care if she's a governess. I don't care what society thinks. I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving to her that she's not invisible, that she's never been invisible, that she is the most important person in my world." "And if she doesn't want you?" The question hung in the air, brutal in its simplicity. "Then I'll help her build whatever life she does want," Griffin said quietly. "I'll give her resources, connections, freedom. I'll make sure Lady Vance can never touch her again. And then I'll let her go, and I'll spend the rest of my days knowing I did the right thing, even if it breaks me." Finch was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. 2 weeks, Your Grace. Can you survive 2 more weeks?" Griffin thought about Helena's face, about the bruises that marked her skin, about the 18 months she was trying to endure, not knowing that salvation was already coming for her. "Yes," he said. "For her, I can survive anything." The Thursday market arrived with a bitter wind and clouds that threatened snow. Griffin had positioned himself in the shadows of the church doorway long before Helena's arrival, dressed in plain clothes that disguised his wealth and station. He had done this every Thursday for months now, watching her move through the market, cataloging her purchases, studying the careful way she counted her coins. It was pathetic. He knew it was pathetic. A duke hiding in doorways to catch glimpses of a governess. But he couldn't stop. He had tried. Every week he told himself he would stay away, that the surveillance reports were enough, that he didn't need to see her with his own eyes. And every week he found himself here anyway. She arrived at 10:30, her basket on her arm, and her thin cloak inadequate against the November cold. Griffin watched her navigate the crowd with the hypervigilance of prey, always aware of her surroundings, always leaving herself escape routes. She paused at the bookseller's stall, her fingers trailing over spines she clearly couldn't afford, her face soft with longing. Griffin wanted to buy her every book in the market. He wanted to fill a library with everything she had ever dreamed of reading and watch her discover it all. He wanted... "Miss Wren, isn't it?" Griffin's attention sharpened. A man had approached Helena, young, sandy-haired, with the confident bearing of a country gentleman. Griffin recognized him from his investigation files. Edmund Blackwood, distant cousin to Lady Pemberton, heir to a modest fortune and a reputation for pursuing vulnerable women. "Mr. Blackwood." Helena's voice was carefully neutral, but Griffin could see her posture change, the wariness, the calculation, the defensive stillness. "I remember. I hoped I might see you again." Blackwood moved closer, positioning himself between Helena and the rest of the square. "I looked for you at subsequent events, but you never seemed to attend. I don't attend many social functions, Mr. Blackwood. My position doesn't permit it." "Such a waste." Blackwood's smile widened, and something ugly lurked behind it. "A woman with your obvious intelligence and refinement, stuck teaching children who don't appreciate you. I could offer you so much more, Miss Wren." Griffin's hands curled into fists. He took a step forward, every instinct screaming at him to cross the square and break Blackwood's perfectly straight nose. But Helena was already responding, her voice cold as ice. "Mr. Blackwood, I must ask you to step back. Don't be like that. I'm only being friendly. You're being inappropriate, and I would like you to stop. There's no need to be rude." Blackwood reached out and grabbed her wrist, his grip tight enough to make her wince. "I'm offering you an opportunity most women in your position would appreciate. A pretty thing like you, wasting away in some country house. I could set you up in London, give you everything you need. All you'd have to do is show a little appreciation." Helena's face went pale with fury and fear. "Release me." "Not until you hear me out. The lady asked you to release her." Griffin was across the square before he realized he had moved, his voice cutting through the market noise like a blade. Blackwood spun, his grip on Helena's wrist loosening, his face registering shock and then alarm as he recognized who had interrupted him. "Your Grace." Blackwood released Helena entirely, taking a stumbling step backward. "I didn't realize you were acquainted with Miss Wren." Griffin positioned himself between Helena and Blackwood, his body a shield. "I'm not. But I am acquainted with the basic principles of civilized behavior, which you seem to have forgotten. I know exactly what you were merely." Griffin's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more threat than a shout. "I suggest you leave, Mr. Blackwood, immediately. And if I ever see you within 10 feet of this woman again, I will ruin you so thoroughly that your own mother won't acknowledge you. Do we understand each other?" Blackwood's face contorted with fury and humiliation, but he was not stupid enough to challenge a duke in public. He shot Helena a look of pure venom, then turned and fled. Griffin watched him go, then turned to Helena. She was staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. Confusion, wariness, something that might have been hope. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentler now. "Did he hurt you?" "My wrist." She held it up, and Griffin could see the reddening marks where Blackwood had gripped her. "But it's nothing. I've had worse." The words were matter-of-fact, and that matter-of-factness broke something inside Griffin. "I've had worse," said like pain was simply part of her existence, to be catalogued and endured. "May I?" He gestured toward her wrist, and when she nodded, he took it in his hands. His touch was gentle, his fingers light as he examined the damage. "It will bruise," he said quietly. "I'm sorry I didn't intervene sooner." "You intervened at all." Helena pulled her wrist free, but not roughly. "That's more than most would do for a governess they've never met. You deserve more than most, Miss Wren." She blinked, clearly startled by the statement. "I don't understand." "I know." Griffin stepped back, giving her space. "Someday, perhaps I'll explain. But for now, be careful. Men like Blackwood don't accept rejection gracefully." He turned and walked away before she could respond, melting back into the crowd, his heart pounding and his hands shaking with the effort of leaving her. He had spoken to her. After 8 months of watching from a distance, he had finally heard her voice, seen her face up close, felt the warmth of her skin beneath his fingers, and it had only made everything worse. The night of the Pemberton ball arrived on a wave of frost and anticipation. Griffin had spent 2 weeks preparing, positioning allies, briefing solicitors, ensuring that every piece of his plan was in place. Lady Dorothea Vance would be publicly exposed tonight. Helena would be removed from her control, and Griffin would finally be able to stop watching from the shadows. He dressed with more care than he had taken in years, choosing evening clothes that emphasized his breadth and height, that made him look as imposing as his reputation suggested. The scar across his cheek, legacy of a Russian saber in the Crimea, stood out stark and silver against his tanned skin. He knew, like exactly what society believed him to be. Dangerous. Good. Tonight, he needed to be dangerous. Pemberton Manor blazed with light as his carriage approached. Griffin moved through the crush of guests with single-minded purpose, acknowledging greetings and declining dances, scanning every room for the flash of gray that would signal Helena's presence. He found her in the family parlor on the second floor, seated in a shadowed corner, while the children she chaperoned played nearby. She was wearing the gray dress he recognized from his surveillance, shapeless, colorless, designed to render her invisible. But she wasn't invisible, not to him. She never had been. He was about to approach when he heard Blackwood's voice. "Miss Wren, what an unexpected pleasure." Griffin froze, every muscle tensing. Blackwood stood in the doorway, his evening clothes impeccable, his smile predatory. He was moving toward Helena with the confidence of a man who believed he had the upper hand. "Mr. Blackwood?" Helena rose, her face pale. "I didn't realize you would be attending. Lady Pemberton is a distant cousin. I never miss her winter ball." He stepped closer, backing her against the wall. "I must say, I'm delighted to see you here. After our last conversation, I worried I might have offended you." "You didn't offend me, Mr. Blackwood. You assaulted me." Such harsh words. Blackwood's voice dropped, taking on a dangerous edge. "I was hoping you might reconsider my offer. I've thought of nothing else since the market. A woman like you, wasting away in service. It's criminal. Let me take you away from all this." "I decline." "Now please, you're making a mistake." His hand shot out, grabbing her arm with enough force to make her gasp. "Women in your position don't get to say no to men like me. Release her." Griffin's voice cracked through the room like thunder. He was across the parlor in 3 strides, his hand closing on Blackwood's shoulder and wrenching him away from Helena with enough force to send him stumbling. "Your Grace." Blackwood straightened, his face contorting with fury. "This is none of your concern." "I'm making it my concern." Griffin positioned himself in front of Helena, his body blocking any approach. "I warned you, Blackwood. I told you what would happen if I ever saw you near her again. She's just a governess. She's under my protection." Griffin's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than a shout. "And you just assaulted her in front of witnesses. I'd suggest you leave now, before I decide to press charges." Blackwood's face went white with rage, but he looked around and saw what Griffin had already noticed: a dozen pairs of eyes watching, a dozen witnesses to his behavior. Whatever he had planned tonight, it was over. "This isn't finished," he hissed, and fled. Griffin watched him go, then turned to Helena. She was pressed against the wall, her arm cradled against her chest, her face a mask of shock and fear. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentler now. "My arm," he grabbed. "May I see?" She nodded, and Griffin took her arm in his hands. The sleeve of her dress had been pulled askew by Blackwood's grip, and as he examined her arm, the fabric gaped further, revealing a strip of skin marked with bruises. But not bruises from tonight. These were older, yellow and green and purple, layered over each other in a tapestry of abuse that made Griffin's blood run cold. His eyes moved higher, to where her dress had slipped at the shoulder. More bruises, and higher still, to her face, where a fresh mark purpled her left cheekbone. "Those bruises," he said quietly. "The ones on your arm, on your face. Those aren't from Blackwood." Helena went still. "Someone else has been hurting you." Griffin's hands tightened fractionally on her arm, not painfully, but with controlled intensity. "Someone has been hurting you for a long time." I fell. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I slipped on the stairs. Don't." The word cut through her excuse like a blade. "Don't lie to me, Helena. Please. I've spent 8 months watching you suffer. I've documented everything Lady Vance has done to you. I know about the beatings. I know about the starvation. I know about the riding crop she keeps in the morning room." Helena's face drained of color. "How? Because I've been building a case against her. Because I've been waiting for the right moment to remove you from her control. Because—" his voice cracked. "Because I have been obsessed with saving you since the moment I first saw your face, and I cannot watch you suffer for one more day." "I don't understand." Helena's voice trembled. "Why would you? I'm no one. I'm nothing." "You are not nothing." Griffin's grip on her arm gentled, his thumb tracing a soft circle against her bruised skin. "You are the strongest person I have ever known. You have survived 3 years of abuse that would have broken anyone else. And I am going to spend the rest of my life proving to you that you are worth saving. If you'll let me." Tears were streaming down Helena's face now, the first tears she had allowed anyone to see in 3 years. "How do I know I can trust you?" "You don't." Griffin's voice was raw with honesty. "You have no reason to trust me. I'm a stranger who has been watching you for months without your knowledge or consent. But I'm asking you, begging you, to give me a chance. Let me get you out of here. Let me take you somewhere safe, and tomorrow, when you've rested, you can decide what happens next." Before Helena could respond, a sharp voice cut through the moment. "Miss Wren!" Lady Dorothea stood in the doorway, her beautiful face twisted with fury. Her eyes took in the scene. Helena's tear-streaked face, her exposed shoulder, the Duke of Shadowmere standing far too close, and her expression shifted from anger to calculation. "Your Grace," Lady Dorothea swept into the room, her composure restored with practiced ease. "I had no idea you were acquainted with my governess." "We've only just met." Griffin's voice was ice. "But I've known about Miss Wren for quite some time, Lady Vance. I've known, for instance, that she walks 3 miles to the village market because you won't allow her use of a carriage. I've known that she wears long sleeves in high summer to hide the bruises you inflict upon her." He stepped forward, and Lady Dorothea stumbled back. "And I've known that you've been beating her systematically for 3 years, while convincing her that no one would believe her if she spoke." Lady Dorothea went white. "I don't know what lies this girl has been telling you. She's told me nothing. Everything I know came from other sources." Griffin smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Helena had ever seen. "Did you think no one would notice, Lady Vance? Did you think you could brutalize a young woman for 3 years and no one would care? She's a servant. She's nothing. She is under my protection now." Griffin's voice cracked like a whip. "And unless you do exactly as I say, I will destroy you so thoroughly that your own mother won't acknowledge you." What followed was a masterpiece of calculated devastation. Griffin laid out his evidence, the servant testimony, the physician's report, the financial leverage. He informed Lady Dorothea that Helena would be leaving tonight, that the children would accompany them, that any attempt to interfere would result in immediate and catastrophic consequences. Lady Dorothea raged. She wept. She threatened. And then, finally, she looked at Helena with an expression of such pure hatred that Helena felt it like a physical blow. "You think you've won?" Lady Dorothea hissed. "You think he'll protect you forever? Men like him don't save women like you. They use you. They discard you. You'll be back in the gutter within a year." "Remove her," Griffin said quietly, and the footman who had materialized during the confrontation half-dragged Lady Dorothea from the room. Helena stood frozen in the silence that followed, her entire world upended in the space of 20 minutes. "Miss Wren." Griffin's voice was gentle now. All the cold fury directed at Lady Dorothea vanished as if it had never been. "Can you walk?" She nodded mutely. "Good. Take the children and come with me. There's a carriage waiting outside." He offered her his arm. Helena took it. And as they walked out of the parlor together, the feared Duke of Shadowmere and the invisible governess, Helena felt something she had not felt in 3 years. Pwom. The carriage ride to Ravensholm passed in a blur of warmth and revelations. Griffin told her everything: the investigation, the planning, the 8 months of watching from a distance. He held nothing back, and his honesty was as disorienting as everything else that had happened tonight. Ravensholm rose out of the darkness like a dream. Servants appeared with silent efficiency, ushering the children to warm beds and leading Helena to a suite of rooms more luxurious than anything she had ever known. A fire crackled in the grate. Fresh flowers perfumed the air. The bed was draped in silk. "Rest tonight," Griffin said from the doorway. "Tomorrow, we begin sorting everything out." Helena nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Griffin withdrew, and she was alone. She should have slept. She was exhausted, emotionally, physically, spiritually drained. But sleep wouldn't come. Her mind kept racing over everything that had happened, everything Griffin had said, everything she was supposed to feel. So instead of sleeping, she explored. Ravensholm was vast, full of corridors and chambers that seemed to go on forever. Helena wandered through them in a daze, not really looking for anything, just moving because stillness felt impossible. She found the room by accident. The door was at the end of a corridor in the east wing, unmarked and unremarkable. Helena pushed it open without thinking and stopped breathing. Maps covered one wall, documents covered another, and covering the third wall, arranged with meticulous precision, was her. Sketches of her face, a dozen at least, rendered from different angles, capturing different expressions. Notes about her movements, her habits, her routine. A pressed violet in a glass case, a lock of brown hair in a silver box, a calendar marking the days since Griffin had first seen her, with each Thursday, market day, circled in red. Helena's knees buckled. She sank into a chair, staring at the wall that documented 8 months of obsessive surveillance, and felt everything she had begun to believe crumble around her. He had told her about the watching. He had told her about the investigation. But this visual representation of his fixation, was something else entirely. This was not calculated strategy. This was a shrine. This was obsession made manifest. Lady Dorothea's words echoed in her mind. "Men like him don't save women like you. They use you." "You found it." Griffin stood in the doorway, his face pale in the lamplight. Helena looked up, and whatever he saw in her expression made him flinch. "Helena, what is this?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "What is all this?" He entered the room slowly, his movements careful. "Evidence, research, everything I needed to—" "That's not evidence." Helena pointed at the sketches, at the lock of hair, at the pressed violet. "That's obsession. That's—" She broke off, unable to find words for what she felt. "You kept a lock of my hair. You sketched my face a dozen times. You marked every single day since you first saw me like you were counting down to what? What was the end goal?" "I thought." Griffin stopped, running a hand through his dark hair. "I don't know what I thought. I wasn't thinking. I was feeling. And what I felt was so overwhelming that I couldn't what? Control yourself? Behave like a rational person?" Helena's voice was rising, all the fear and confusion crystallizing into something sharp. "Do you understand how this looks? You watched me without my knowledge. You collected pieces of me like I was a prize to be won. You built a shrine to your obsession and kept it hidden while you told me you loved me. Everything I told you was true. How am I supposed to believe that?" Helena was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "How am I supposed to trust anything you've said? You saved me from one form of control, and now I find this. How do I know I haven't just traded one prison for another?" Griffin stood very still, his hands at his sides, his face a mask of anguish. He made no move to approach her, no attempt to defend himself. "You're right," he said quietly. "Everything you're saying is right. I behaved in a way that was invasive and inappropriate. I told myself it was strategy, but it wasn't. It was obsession, and I have no excuse." "Then why? Why did you do it?" The question hung between them, brutal in its simplicity. "Because I was lonely," Griffin's voice cracked. Because I saw you at that concert, and something in your face made me feel less alone for the first time in years. Because I convinced myself that watching you was helping you, protecting you, when really it was feeding something broken inside me. He met her eyes, and his expression was raw with vulnerability. Because I've spent so long being feared that I forgot what it felt like to want to be loved. And you made me remember, and I didn't know how to handle that, so I handled it badly. Helena stared at him, this powerful, feared man who had just stripped himself bare before her. I need time, she said finally. I need to think. I need to understand if I can ever trust you after seeing this. I know. Griffin nodded slowly. Take whatever time you need. I'll have this room cleared by morning. I'll give you space. I'll do whatever it takes. And if I can't? If I decide this is too much, that I need to leave? Then I'll help you leave. I'll provide whatever you need to build a life somewhere else. His voice was steady, but his eyes were anguished. I love you, Helena. But loving you means wanting what's best for you, even if what's best for you isn't me. Helena held his gaze for a long moment. Then, without another word, she walked past him and out of the room. The 6 weeks that followed were the worst of Griffin's life. He kept his distance, as he had promised. He took meals in his study. He conducted business through intermediaries. He avoided any corridor where he might accidentally encounter Helena, any room where she might be sitting, any moment where she might look up and see the desperate longing in his eyes. But he couldn't stop thinking about her. He lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, imagining her in her suite of rooms just 2 floors above him. Was she sleeping? Was she thinking about him? Was she planning to leave? He couldn't eat. Food turned to ash in his mouth. He lost weight rapidly, his clothes hanging loose on a frame that had already been lean from military discipline. He couldn't work. Documents piled up on his desk, unread. Correspondence went unanswered. His solicitors and business partners sent increasingly concerned messages that he ignored. He was dying by inches, and there was nothing he could do about it. Your Grace, Griffin looked up. Finch stood in the doorway of his study, his weathered face tight with concern. What is it? You haven't eaten in 3 days. You haven't slept in longer. The staff is worried. Finch paused. I'm worried. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're destroying yourself. Griffin laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. What would you have me do, Finch? She's here, in my house, and I can't see her. I can't speak to her. I can't do anything except wait and wonder if today is the day she decides I'm not worth forgiving. Have you considered that perhaps you're not the only one suffering? Griffin went still. What do you mean? Miss Wren asks about you. Every day. She asks the staff how you're doing, whether you're eating, whether you're sleeping. Finch's voice gentled. She knows you're struggling, Your Grace, and I believe it troubles her. Griffin's heart clenched. Helena was asking about him. Helena cared whether he was eating. It doesn't matter, he said quietly. I promised her space. I promised her time. I won't break that promise just because I'm struggling. Even if keeping that promise kills you? Even then. Griffin met Finch's eyes. She matters more than I do, Finch. She has always mattered more than I do. Finch was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded and withdrew. Griffin turned back to the window, staring out at gardens he couldn't see, and continued his slow dissolution. Helena was not faring much better. She had expected the time alone to clarify her feelings, to help her sort through the confusion and fear and complicated longing that Griffin had inspired. Instead, the weeks of separation only made everything worse. She couldn't stop thinking about him. She thought about the surveillance room, yes, the sketches, the lock of hair, the calendar. But she also thought about his voice when he had confessed his loneliness, the way he had knelt before her at the ball, his touch gentle on her bruised arm, the raw vulnerability in his eyes when he had accepted her anger without defense. She thought about what the servants told her when she asked that the Duke wasn't eating, that he wasn't sleeping, that he was wasting away in his study, keeping his promise to give her space even as it destroyed him. And she thought about the woman who arrived at Ravensholm in the 3rd week of Helena's exile. Lady Marguerite Ashworth was everything Helena was not. Beautiful, wealthy, titled, appropriate. She swept into Ravensholm one afternoon, all silk and diamonds and calculated charm, demanding to see the Duke on urgent business. Helena watched from the gallery as Lady Marguerite was shown into the drawing room. She watched as Griffin emerged from his study, gaunt, hollow-eyed, barely recognizable, to receive his guest. She watched as Lady Marguerite laid a possessive hand on Griffin's arm and smiled up at him with unmistakable invitation. And she felt something she had never expected to feel. Jealousy. Pure, irrational, consuming jealousy that burned through her veins like acid. The thought of this beautiful woman touching Griffin, smiling at Griffin, taking Griffin away. It was unbearable. It was impossible. It was clarifying. Helena turned from the gallery and walked quickly to her rooms, her heart pounding and her mind racing. She was jealous. She was jealous because she didn't want anyone else to have him. She was jealous because, despite everything, despite the surveillance room and the obsession and the broken trust, she had fallen in love with him. She loved his vulnerability. She loved his honesty. She loved the way he had accepted her anger and given her space even though it was killing him. She loved the broken, lonely man beneath the fearsome Duke, and she was not going to let Lady Marguerite Ashworth take him from her. Helena didn't bother to change her dress or fix her hair. She walked directly from her rooms to the drawing room, pushed open the door, and stopped in the threshold. Griffin and Lady Marguerite looked up simultaneously. Lady Marguerite's expression flickered with annoyance at the interruption. But Griffin looked at Helena like she was the sun emerging from behind storm clouds, like she was oxygen after drowning, like she was everything. "Miss Wren," Lady Marguerite's voice was cool. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "We haven't." Helena walked into the room, positioning herself directly between Griffin and his guest. "I'm Helena Wren. I'm living here as the Duke's guest." Lady Marguerite's eyes narrowed. "I see. How unconventional." "Yes, it is." Helena turned to Griffin, who was watching her with an expression of hope, so desperate it made her heart ache. "Your Grace, I wonder if I might have a word with you. In private." "Lady Marguerite and I were discussing. It can wait." Helena held his gaze. "What I have to say cannot." Lady Marguerite sputtered with indignation, but Griffin was already moving toward the door. "Lady Marguerite, I apologize for cutting our visit short. My steward will see you out." "Griffin!" Lady Marguerite's composure finally cracked. "You cannot seriously be choosing this nobody over—" "Miss Wren is not a nobody." Griffin's voice was ice. "Miss Wren is the woman I love, and I will thank you not to speak of her with anything less than complete respect." He took Helena's arm and led her from the room, leaving Lady Marguerite gaping after them. They walked in silence to the library, the same library where they had shared so many conversations before the surveillance room, before the separation, before everything fell apart. Griffin closed the door and turned to face Helena, his expression uncertain. "You wanted to speak with me?" "Yes." Helena took a deep breath. "I've been thinking. About you. About us. About what I want." "And what have you concluded?" "That I'm jealous." The word came out more forcefully than Helena had intended. "That watching Lady Marguerite touch you made me want to scream, that the thought of anyone else having you is unbearable." Griffin's breath caught. "Helena, I'm not finished." Helena stepped closer, holding his gaze. I've also concluded that I'm still angry. I'm still hurt. The surveillance room frightened me, and I don't know if I'll ever completely understand it." She paused. "But I've concluded something else, too." "What?" "That I love you." The words emerged steady and clear. "That I fell in love with you despite everything, despite the obsession and the broken trust and the fear. That the real you, the vulnerable you, the lonely man who forgot what it felt like to want to be loved, that man is worth fighting for." Griffin's eyes filled with tears. "You love me?" "I love you." Helena reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the scar along his cheek. "But I need you to understand something. I am not a prize to be won. I am not a damsel to be claimed. If we do this, if we build something together, it has to be as equals. Partners." "Partners," Griffin repeated, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes, partners. Anything you want, Helena. Anything at all. I want you to promise me that there will be no more surveillance, no more collecting pieces of me without my knowledge, no more obsession that doesn't include me as an active participant. I promise. I want you to promise me that you'll talk to me when you're struggling, instead of wasting away in your study where I can't reach you. I promise. And I want you to promise me," Helena's voice trembled, "that you'll love me as I am, not as some idealized version you've built in your head. That you'll accept my flaws and my fears and my anger, and love me anyway. I already do." Griffin's hands rose to cup her face, his touch impossibly tender. "I've loved you since the moment I first saw you. I'll love you until the day I die. And I'll spend every moment between proving that you made the right choice in forgiving me." "Then kiss me," Helena said, "and let's begin." He kissed her. It was not gentle. Not after 6 weeks of separation, 6 weeks of wanting, 6 weeks of thinking they might have lost each other forever. It was fierce and desperate and consuming, the kiss of two people who had been drowning and had finally found air. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Griffin rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. "I love you, I love you, I love you." "I know," Helena smiled. "I love you too, even though you're occasionally terrifying." "Only occasionally. The rest of the time you're merely insufferable." He laughed, a real laugh, full and warm, and pulled her close, and Helena felt the last of her walls crumble. The nightmare was over. The dream was finally beginning. But their trials were not yet complete. Lady Dorothea Vance emerged from exile 2 months after Helena and Griffin's reconciliation, armed with rumors and insinuations and the desperate fury of a woman with nothing left to lose. She spread whispers through society like poison. That Helena had seduced Griffin before marriage, that she had manipulated her way into his bed and fortune, that she was nothing but a scheming governess who had trapped a credulous duke. The whispers caught fire. Society, always eager for scandal, embraced the narrative with enthusiasm. Helena discovered the extent of the damage at her first public appearance as Griffin's acknowledged partner. The Marchioness of Thornbury's spring ball should have been her introduction to the world as the woman the Duke of Shadowmere had chosen. Instead, it became her trial by fire. She entered the ballroom on Griffin's arm, wearing a gown of deep blue silk that he had commissioned from the finest modiste in London. She had never felt more beautiful or more terrified. The whispers started immediately. "That's her. The governess?" "I heard she was warming his bed for months before he acknowledged her. Shameless. Absolutely shameless. She must have trapped him somehow. Why else would a duke?" Helena kept her expression composed, but Griffin could feel her trembling against his arm. "We can leave," murmured. "Say the word, and we'll go." "No," Helena lifted her chin. "I won't give them the satisfaction." They moved through the crowd, and the sea of guests parted around them, but not in deference, in avoidance. Ladies who should have welcomed Helena with curtsies turned their backs. Gentlemen who should have requested introductions suddenly found pressing business elsewhere. Within minutes, Helena and Griffin stood alone in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by a wasteland of cut and shun. Well, a familiar voice cut through the murmurs. If it isn't the Duke and his little strumpet? Helena turned. Lady Dorothea Vance stood behind them, resplendent in crimson silk, her beautiful face arranged in an expression of malicious delight. Lady Vance, Griffin's voice was ice. I thought I made it clear what would happen if you ever spoke to Miss Wren again. You made threats, Your Grace, but threats only work if the person being threatened has something left to lose. Lady Dorothea's smile widened. I've lost everything. My home, my reputation, my children, all because of this scheming little wretch. She turned to Helena, her eyes blazing with hatred. Did you think I would simply disappear? Did you think I would let you destroy my life and face no consequences? You destroyed your own life. Helena's voice was steady, though her heart was pounding. You beat me for 3 years. You starved me. You tried to break my spirit. Everything that has happened to you is a consequence of your own cruelty. Cruelty, Lady Dorothea laughed. I was trying to teach you your place. You were a servant, Helena, a nothing. And now look at you, standing in a ballroom, wearing silk, pretending you belong here. She gestured at the watching crowd. They know the truth. They know what you are. No matter how many pretty dresses he buys you, no matter how many parties you attend, you will never be one of them. The ballroom had gone silent. Every eye was fixed on the confrontation, every ear straining to catch every word. Helena could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on her, the skepticism, the contempt, the gleeful anticipation of her humiliation. And suddenly, she was done. Done being afraid. Done being ashamed. Done letting this woman, this monster who had beaten her and starved her and tried to destroy her, have any power over her at all. You're right, Helena said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. I was a servant. I was a governess, living in an attic room, walking 3 miles to market because you wouldn't allow me use of a carriage. I was beaten so regularly that I learned to hide bruises the way other women hide blemishes. I was starved and isolated and convinced that I was worthless. Lady Dorothea's smile faltered. This was not the reaction she had expected. But here's what you don't understand, Helena continued. None of that defines me. I survived you, Lady Vance. I survived 3 years of your cruelty with my dignity intact. And I found someone who saw my worth when you tried to convince me I had none. She took Griffin's hand, intertwining their fingers. So yes, I was a governess. Yes, I was nothing by society's standards. But I am loved. I am valued. And I will not let you, or anyone else, make me feel ashamed of where I came from. The ballroom remained silent, but the quality of the silence had changed. Helena could see expressions shifting, judgment giving way to something else. Admiration, perhaps, or recognition. Furthermore, Griffin's voice cut through the silence, cold and commanding. I have something to share with this assembled company. Evidence I had hoped never to make public, but which Lady Vance's behavior tonight makes necessary. He gestured, and Finch appeared from the crowd, carrying a leather folder. This folder, Griffin continued, contains sworn testimony from 6 former members of the Vance household, documenting systematic abuse of Miss Wren over a period of 3 years. It contains a physician's assessment of injuries consistent with repeated beatings, and it contains evidence that Lady Vance embezzled funds from her own household accounts, funds that were meant for her children's education. The crowd murmured. Lady Dorothea's face went white. I had intended to keep this evidence private, Griffin said. I had hoped that Lady Vance would accept her defeat gracefully and allow Miss Wren to build a new life in peace. But since she has chosen to continue her campaign of harassment, he opened the folder and withdrew a sheaf of papers. I see no choice but to make these documents public. You can't. Lady Dorothea's voice was shrill. You wouldn't. I can, and I will. Griffin's eyes were merciless. By tomorrow morning, every newspaper in London will have copies of this testimony. Every member of society will know exactly what kind of monster you are. And whatever shreds of reputation you have left will be destroyed utterly. Lady Dorothea swayed on her feet. The crimson dress that had looked so triumphant moments ago now seemed to hang on her like a shroud. You've lost, Griffin said quietly. You lost the moment you raised your hand against Helena. And now, finally, you will face the consequences. He turned his back on her, dismissing her as completely as if she had ceased to exist. Miss Wren. He offered Helena his arm, his voice warm with love and pride. May I have this dance? Helena took his arm. You may, Your Grace. They walked onto the empty dance floor. The orchestra, reading the room, struck up a waltz, and as Griffin swept Helena into his arms as they began to move across the marble floor, something extraordinary happened. People started clapping. First one person, then another, then a dozen, then 100. The applause built like a wave, washing over them, drowning out the whispers and the doubts and the cruelty of moments before. Helena looked up at Griffin, tears streaming down her face. They're applauding, she whispered. They're applauding you. Griffin's voice was rough with emotion. They're applauding your courage, your dignity, your refusal to be ashamed. I couldn't have done it without you. You could have done anything. He pulled her closer, his arms tightening around her. You're the strongest person I've ever known, Helena. I'm just grateful I get to stand beside you. They danced until the music ended, surrounded by a ballroom full of people who had witnessed the extraordinary spectacle of a governess facing down her abuser and emerging triumphant. And when they finally left, walking through a crowd that parted with respect instead of avoidance, receiving nods and smiles instead of cuts and shuns, Helena knew that something fundamental had changed. She was not invisible anymore. She was not ashamed. She was free. The wedding took place 1 month later in the chapel at Raven's home, with half the county in attendance. Helena wore ivory silk and carried hothouse roses. Griffin wept when he saw her walking down the aisle. This powerful duke, this feared man, crying like a child at the sight of the woman he loved. I, Griffin Nathaniel Mercer, take thee, Helena Marie Wren. The words rang through the chapel, binding them together with the weight of law and love. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, the cheer that rose from the guests was genuine and heartfelt. Duchess of Shadowmere, Griffin murmured against Helena's lips after he kissed her. Helena Mercer. My wife. Your wife, she agreed. Even though you're occasionally terrifying. Only occasionally? The rest of the time, you're merely insufferable. He laughed and kissed her again, and the crowd cheered louder. They adopted the children officially, Julian and Cecily, who had flourished in the months since their rescue. They had children of their own, 4 of them, born over the next decade. Raven's home filled with laughter and love and the beautiful chaos of a family that had been built from the ashes of suffering. Lady Dorothea Vance was never heard from again. The documents Griffin released destroyed what remained of her reputation. She fled to the continent, then to obscurity, and finally to the unmarked grave of a woman who had been forgotten by everyone who had ever known her. And Helena, the governess they beat in secret, the nothing who had pretended to be something, became one of the most celebrated women in England. Not for her title, though she wore it with grace. Not for her wealth, though she used it generously. But for her courage. For her dignity. For the story of her survival that inspired countless other women to believe that they, too, could escape their circumstances and build something beautiful. I used to dream about being seen, Helena told Griffin one evening, 30 years after their wedding night. They were sitting in the library at Raven's home, watching their grandchildren play in the garden below. When I was that girl in the gray dress, hiding bruises and counting pennies, I used to dream about someone finding me. And now? Griffin asked, his arm around her, his scarred cheek pressed against her silver-streaked hair. Now, I understand something I didn't then. Helena turned to look at him. This man who had changed everything, who had fought for her and with her, who had loved her imperfectly but truly for 3 decades. Being seen isn't about rescue, it's about recognition. It's about someone looking at all of you, the broken parts and the strong parts, the fears and the hopes, and saying, yes, this is who I choose. I chose you, Griffin said, the moment I saw you at that concert, closing your eyes during the violin solo. I chose you then, and I've chosen you every day since. Even when I was insufferable, especially when you were insufferable. He kissed her softly. It's my favorite quality. Helena laughed, and the sound filled the library with warmth and light, and the quiet joy of a love that had been tested by fire and proven unbreakable. She was loved, she was seen, she was home, and she was never, ever invisible again.